What's going on, y'all? I'm your host, Cool Colas, and you are now tuning into a new episode on my channel. So, if y'all previously watched the video that I just released, I talked about my thoughts on the Ironheart TV series. Now I want to go into the tropes, that is, the negative tropes that I noticed in this TV series. And I specifically want to make the main topic the low-key black misandry that was going on in this series. So let's get into it. Now, here's the thing. One of the reasons why I made a separate video is because I wanted to talk specifically about the tropes that I noticed, and I wanted to separate it from having a conversation with y'all about giving credit where credit is due. Originally, when I made my very first video that was a prelude to the Ironheart TV show and my initial thoughts before being able to watch it and it coming out, I said it was going to bomb, and it didn't. But I had to admit where I was wrong and tell y'all that I did watch it and I didn't think it was a bad show. It was a decent show overall, but I did notice some tropes, and they do need to be discussed and pointed out because it does diminish the quality of the show. I noticed that in this series, they had a lot of different tropes, agendas, and messages that they put into this series that some of y'all may not have noticed, but I definitely picked up on. And as a result, I want to have a full discussion with y'all about it. One thing that you have to understand is that there is a discussion that's going on regularly on social media. And the reason why I say on social media is because I don't see this conversation had that much in real life. Then again, I don't always have these discussions with people. But regardless, I haven't heard what I'm about to tell you discussed as much in a non-social media based circle than what I've had seen on social media. I see this discussion often about the difference between being pro-black and pro-black woman. For those of you all who are confused about the two terms being pro-black and then being pro-black woman, what people are basically trying to say is that pro-black means making black people a priority, whereas pro-black woman means making black women exclusively a priority. So that's why I say that it's equated to shea butter sambism. It's this idea of seeing black women as a completely different racial or ethnic group that is separate from blackness itself, that should only be recognized, and everybody else is excluded. And you see a lot of times on social media where these shea butter sambas will go on and they will call for some type of uplifting, empowerment, or whatever that is related just to only having that for black women. But see, I got my own terminology. I got my own swagger with it. Whenever I talk about this concept of being a pro-black woman, I call that shea butter sambaism because these two things are essentially the same. I'm bringing this up because a lot of these television shows that I see tend to bring up the concept of shea butter sambaism and glamorize it and make it seem like it's a marketable thing. In some cases, they do it very subtly. In some cases, they do it in a very blatant way. Now, what I noticed about the Ironheart series is that they did it more subtly when it came to the shea butter sambaism. But if you really paid attention, this was a big deal on this show. Give you all a few things that'll just show you what I mean by my point. First of all, in the scene where Riri was called into the dean's office because they were about to expel her, she was having a conversation with this black woman who was basically saying that she tries to get into the space that she's in order to create opportunities for people who look like her. So I wanted to be clear about something when she said that. She wasn't trying to say, I'm making opportunities for black people. What she was trying to say is I make opportunities for black women. See, this is the thing about shea butter sambism. It's all about the art of being posturing. And what I mean by that is the shea butter sambas tend to create messages that are meant exclusively for black women and the empowerment only of black women. They do not care about community uplifting. They care about uplifting just black women and black women alone. If anything, they at times will go along with misandrous propaganda. I'm bringing all this up to basically say that when she made that comment, She was setting the tone that this was going to be about Black women's empowerment, or the way they like to glamorize it on television shows. Another clue that told me that there was somewhat of a shea butter samba narrative going on was the scene where Riri comes back home from college and she enters her house and she sees there's a bunch of women who are just sitting at the table, and it's a bunch of Black women, and that includes her mother as well too. There are a few things that I noticed about these women. Number one, these women didn't have any type of man present around them. There were no Black men in this picture whatsoever. So one could assume that these women all were single, because they either did not show their man, did not present them as someone who was a happy wife, or you literally knew that they just did not have a man, especially in the case of her mother. So that's one way that you show that they were trying to center on Black women, specifically shea butter sambas in this case, and not Black men whatsoever. The second way that you know this too is because of who they had there. Now, this is somewhat of a theory that I have, but I think that there's somewhat of a simulacrum agenda going on. And I talked about simulacrum before in a previous video. So that's this idea that you have this actor or actress who plays a role, and this character has certain personality traits, but ironically, the actor or actress tends to have similar or the same traits as the character that they're portraying, as if they're literally playing themselves. So it's ironic because Cree Summers was playing this sassy, herbal tea-esque type of chick. And then you think about her real life, where she's talking about how she has dating issues. She's probably going to be single the rest of her life because she hasn't found Mr. Right. And also, too, she kind of has somewhat of that earthy, herbal tea type of vibe. These were all subtle signs. So this wasn't anything that was right in your face, but it leads into my next problem, which is that there was a lot of Black misandry that was going on in this series as well too. So I want to talk about that. There was this anti-Black male narrative that was going on, and this is something that is a constant when it comes to Disney. They love to either erase or disrespect Black men in a lot of their television shows. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that, or what typically happens. The Black men in these television shows tend to either be not straight, weak, or they're dead. So in other words, you never have a heterosexual Black male character who is treated as a credible and upstanding love interest who is masculine and also is able to take charge while also being a functioning and positive character. You do not see that very much when you watch these Disney television shows, and this show followed suit of that trend. So let me explain a few things and go into detail about what I mean by this. Look at, first of all, what I would call the Black martyr or the Black sacrificial lamb trope that was kind of going on here. You had Riri's stepfather, who was already killed off. Now, don't get me wrong, the comic books have it where the stepfather dies as well too, but this shows an issue with the actual series more so than just the show alone. Either way, it's an issue in both continuities. The point I'm trying to make is that there was no reason to kill off both the stepdad and the best friend, Natalie. But here's the thing about the stepdad. The stepdad, from what they have presented, seemed to be a masculine, not weak, heterosexual man who was already killed off before the show started. But there's also not any conversation about what her actual dad is like. So it's as if he's just a ghost who never existed in the picture whatsoever. For those of you all who are not aware, the Black martyr trope is when you typically have a Black man who, again, is seen as upstanding, masculine, heterosexual, and also a good person, an influential person, but is killed off before a show, movie, etc. starts, and they are not a character who is shown regularly throughout this TV show or movie. So it's as if they're an afterthought instead of a present figure who helps move the story along in a positive way. This is a common trend that they have with Black male characters. And they do this because they're trying to make it seem like the Black men are a necessary sacrifice to keep the story going in a way that makes sense, instead of making them an ever-present force that is consistently positive throughout the series and actually makes it create a healthy message about black men, generally speaking. So you see this quite a bit, because you haven't just seen this in Ironheart. You've also seen this, for example, with the show Raising Dion. You also have seen this in the movie Princess and the Frog. There's this common idea of taking a black man who's positive, who's upstanding, and the white supremacist knows this, by the way, and you kill him off before he even gets a chance to capture the hearts, the minds, and the interest of the people who would watch and witness his greatness. Now let's take a look at the other characters. So we already talked about the stepdad and how he's basically the black martyr. You also had this black man who was heterosexual, who was a part of the Hoods group, but he was treated as what a lot of people like to refer to as a beta male. He was a weak man. He was somebody who was seen as the comic relief, somebody who wasn't to be taken very seriously. That's why he was even killed off as well too at a certain point, because notice that they had all these different members of the team and they all were badasses. They had these two lesbian chicks who were basically kicking grown men's asses. You had this gay black dude who was a part of the team. You had a black woman who was a part of the team. You had these two racially ambiguous, or I guess they look like they may have been even white Hispanic dudes who were like the leaders of the group. And so you had one black man, and he even looked like he may have been mixed or maybe Afro-Latino himself. And he was, again, this heterosexual but weak black man. They tend to do this a lot in these series, where a black man will be someone who is either a sidekick or somebody who is the second in command or whatever the case may be. And then they're treated as somebody, again, who is comic relief or should not be taken seriously. And in a lot of cases, these men who they do this to aren't even weak looking. They'll do it with big, strong men. That's why you even had in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, where 85-pound soaking wet Shuri was sitting there beating M'Baku, who had to be 300 pounds or whatever, in an arm wrestling match. So you can tell that they take whatever black men that they can and they diminish their masculinity and the importance of their role in a story in a positive manner beyond, again, comic relief. In my book, the Pro-Black Blurred series, exposing anti-black media tropes the blurred way, which you can get on my website at coolcolas.com, by the way, I talk about this system that I created called the anti-black identification rubric. And it's called the AIR method overall. So that's the acronym. The AIR method is when you are looking at anti-blackness and you're trying to figure out a way to establish a pattern of how anti-blackness shows up in some type of thing. In this case, we're talking about media. And this concept states that the first time you see some form of anti-blackness, it is called a potential accident. The second time is called a potential coincidence. And the third instance is called a pattern in practice. In this case, I've already told you about two examples. I've told you one about the stepfather who was already erased before he had a chance to even be shown as a positive character. The second case is the black teammate who was a part of the Hoods group who was seen as a weak man. Now I'm going to give you the third instance. Let's talk about the character Xavier Washington. Xavier Washington, most people look at him and they'll say, oh, he was the love interest and he was a heterosexual black man. But if you really think about it, although he was a heterosexual black man, they still had him somewhat in a weak position. Think about it from this perspective. First of all, he was presented as a love interest, but there wasn't really a whole lot of loving going on between him and Riri. It was almost like he was another brother figure who was being presented or teased as a love interest. The second thing too is he wasn't man enough to even tell Riri about herself. A man who is masculine and stands on principle will tell a woman or really anybody about themselves, even if it means that they have to tell them the cold, hard truth about their poor actions. When Riri was asking if she was a good person, he should have flat out told her that she is not a good person. And he should have also explained the reasons. I mean, even if he didn't want to just give it to her straight, I mean, he could have like put a little sugar on it and whatnot if he really wanted to. He could have been like, listen, like you got some potential because you're a smart chick. You got that going for you, but there are a lot of things that you do that are not good because I've seen you be very selfish and I've seen you do things that are manipulative. And I've also seen you just not hold yourself accountable for the things that you have done to other people. And these are things that are concerning to me. He could have presented it like that and it still would have got the same message across. But this dude was over here dancing around the question more than damn Michael Jackson, y'all. So I'm like, yeah, he wasn't trying to be straightforward with her. My point in saying all this is that there's a clear agenda for them to uplift black women while putting down black men, therefore creating more of a gender divide between black women and black men. And they use this show to do it in a subtle way. So they'll disrespect black men at the stake of uplifting black women, even when it's something that's not necessarily deserved or a narrative that deserves that level of uplifting or that type of aesthetic attached to it. Because what they tend to do is say, you know what? I'm going to create a story. It may or may not be decent. In this case, it was actually pretty decent. And we're going to ride off of the coattail of how decent it was in order for you to ignore all of the negative tropes that we put in it. They do this a lot of times with shows. They'll make the show pretty good, but then they'll throw in their own tropes and messages and things like that in there so that anybody who sits there and criticizes the things that they see negatively, they're going to get shot down because it looks as if they're just hating on a project instead of being discerning about compartmentalizing the difference between having a good story versus having bad tropes. Anyway, y'all, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope you all enjoy what I had to say, and I'll definitely have more to come, so make sure you stay tuned. In the meantime, I would love it if you hit the like button, subscribe button, share button, and the bell icon so you get notifications for whenever I come out with new content on this channel. In the meantime, I would love it if you left me a comment below. That way I can get back to whatever it is that you have to say about this topic. Other than that, I will talk to y'all later. Peace out, y'all.